So before we get into it, I just wanted to say thank you everybody so much for coming to this um, game chat discussion with Daphne today. And unfortunately, something came up with Adam, so I'm kind of hosting in for him today. So I'll be just here to help direct everything and kind of help Daphne go through any questions if there are any. And please, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll go through them with the last 15 minutes or however much time we have at the end. Or if you feel more comfortable just kind of unmuting yourself near the end, please feel free to do so. And we are recording this as well, and we are planning on putting it up on YouTube, so it should be pretty accessible to everybody, hopefully by the end of the weekend. So that should be really nice for any folks who missed it or just needed to rehear something. And just to give a quick intro to Daphne, for some of the folks who may have not had the chance to meet her, Daphne is a senior at College for Creative Studies, and she is currently a 3D environment artist at Singularity 6 and previously worked on Little Kitty Big City. If you guys aren't familiar with that game, you should definitely Google it. It's a really sweet, amazing indie game that's soon to be coming to all of us. So, and also, Daphne just got really awesome news today that she won the student contest for World of Warcraft. So, congrats! That's a huge
Thanks.
feat, and it's really awesome to have somebody so inspiring, at the college with us. So,
Thank you.
yeah, of course. So, passing it over to Daphne and her presentation.
Cool beans. Okay. Can you all see
Hey
my
Dad, it's
screen?
Mo. Just wanted to give you a quick call, let you know I'm doing all right. Hope
Oh,
you are too.
Morgan,
I'll
I'm
probably talk
gonna
to you soon anyway,
server
but I hope
mute.
you're doing well.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about that.
Um, no worries. So you can see my screen okay? Just want to make sure.
Yep, we can see it
Okay,
perfectly
cool,
fine.
cool. All right, we're gonna talk about foliage. Hey, it's an excuse for me to hold you all hostage so I can talk about my favorite thing about being a 3D artist. Let's go. I
Let's
want to preface
go.
I want to preface this and say, this is for Photoshop, but also it kind of just goes to any drawing program. I'm just a slave to Adobe, unfortunately, so that's what I'm gonna be using, but I'm sure like whatever brush settings or painting this I do in Photoshop is there's an equivalent and probably a better one in any other drawing program. So if you don't use Photoshop, don't feel like it's the end of the world. You can literally do this shit in Painter. I just want to put that out there. Okay, cool. So we're gonna talk. Well, this is all hand painted stuff today. I do kind of want to preface sort of at least the visual difference between PBR plants and hand painted plants. So as I'm sure a lot of you know, when we, render with PBR stuffs, we're using your base color, normal, roughness matte, metallic, which is interesting to think about in foliage, but if you want to make like a metallic rose, that'd be kind of pretty. Um, ambient occlusion, those sorts of things. So you're using a bunch of different maps to, get the end result of said plant. Um, in terms of working with PBR, I kind of consider this to be a longer pipeline. So, you're gonna have to start with, well, at least I start with a plane and Maya or whatever, and make a whole low poly, then bring that into ZBrush to a high poly, and then you gotta unwrap that, which honestly isn't that much of a pain in the butt, thankfully. And then you have to texture it. So it's a lot of steps to get the end result, which in this case would be a plant. Um, I also consider, as you can kind of see, this is a piece by Jasmine, who you should totally check out. Um, the I've noticed, mostly thanks to normal maps, that PBR plants tend to have a more chunkier feel to them. Like while they are still just flat cards, maybe with subdivisions that gives them, a bit of a curve. Um, they just look more chunky because you can fake that with normal stuff. And lighting information for the most part is done for you, so you don't really have to pay attention to that half as much. with hand painted stuff, though, that's what we're going to be talking today. You're for the most part using just diffuse only. Sometimes a normal map, depends. But you are reliant on yourself and your painting knowledge to paint the light into the leaves. So while I don't want to make it seem like PBR hand painted, like one of them is easier than the other, in terms of painting, and texturing, this can be a bit more difficult. Honestly, I think it's about the same. You're just approaching it in different ways. Hand painted foliage, if you're not careful, can come across as feeling more flat. Personally, I think the best, most amazing hand painted foliage will always be flatter compared to the best, most amazing PBR foliage. That's just kind of the name of the game. It's more cartoony, I guess, in the ways that I've seen hand painted views, especially like in League of Legends, World of Warcraft. It has a cartoonier vibe, if you want to call it like that. And then it's got a shorter pipeline. So, you don't really have to dive into Maya or ZBrush at least as much as you would as opposed to making PBR plants. You start texturing basically right away, which is very convenient, and to me that is way faster. So here's kind of our agenda for today. I'm actually going to talk a little bit about I want to treat this kind of from a perspective of if you've done foliage before, this is helpful. And then if you've never done it before, you're not completely lost. So we're going to be going over maybe some things that a lot of you already know, but then, not leaving everybody else behind. So I want to go over arranging your layout, what sort of maybe texture size you should use. That's kind of important. The best ways to lay out your foliage. Then we're gonna go into painting some stuff. We're gonna paint a leaf and then talk about some thinner leaves and reeds. Then we're gonna go to more complex things like roses and radial flowers. We'll get into that. And then we'll conquer trees and bushes as well, because basically the same thing. And then after that, I'm gonna go over kind of just a basic guide of how you set up the shape of your alpha cards in Maya or your 3D program of choice. Because honestly, a lot of getting into foliage is kind of understanding how plants work and their shape, and then kind of translating that into your 3D brain. Because a flat card can only go so far, but if you subdivide that in a way that makes it look more natural, then your plant's gonna look really, really sweet. And then I got some final notes, and then we'll do questions. So that's what we're gonna do today. So, as far as arranging layout goes, exercise, who be she? So this varies on a case by case basis. If you're working in a studio, usually they're going to have sort of a guide on what texture sizes you're going to use, limits on draw calls, things to keep in mind in that realm. But generally speaking, though, for your like standard environment project, a 1K by 1K texture will probably go a long way for most of your foliage. Though with that being said, sometimes I forget about a plant or two I wanted to add, and then I make another one. But for the most part, 1K is pretty good. 2K if you're doing a bunch of it, like it's everywhere. Don't be afraid of doing that. Smaller scenes, maybe dioramas. Try to squeeze it down to a 512 by 512. That's very efficient and just good to practice with. And then if you're making like, say you're making a carrot plant, just pack that into a 256 by 256. I say this, I also want to clarify. I mean, for the most part, if you're working on your own project, don't feel like you have to go by these guidelines. But it's a good way to challenge yourself because eventually you'll have to, right? You're going to be working in a studio where if you pull out a 4K texture for a rose plant, there's going to be some issues. So it's just some things to think about, and I think packing can be a really fun challenge. Then there's an example I have of foliage sheet I did a little while ago. And then as far as layout goes, I just think for organizational purposes, it's easier to organize floral parts together. So I tried to do that with the roses. and as well as the different lilies I made and just lily leaves. It kind of, when you're past the painting stage and you're not looking at your pure ref and maybe all the notes that you made for your project, it is a bit convenient once you're in Maya to have all of those parts together. I kind of call them like organs of the plant, kind of gritty, but like you start to forget, wait, what was this leaf for again? And where's the stem? Am I using a gradient or did I paint it out? So bunching those things together can just make your life easier. Also, uh, straighter the better in terms of leaves. That'll make things easier to deform, and then you'll avoid weird distortion stuff later on. Um, you should, if you make gradients, which I technically did not for this specific one, technically this stem I did is kind of a gradient, or the most gradient thing we'll have here. Those should be towards like the edges, because they're basically going to be like squares, right? Like really long rectangles, and just plop them over just to save up space for all of your other plants, which unfortunately are not perfect squares. So that'll free up the UV space and kind of allow you to be able to, when you're creating the plant in your 3D program of choice, it's going to make it easier for you to just get the UVs all put together. So not pictured, but we'll get into it also. Radial pattern leaves. So by that I mean like flowers that like, we'll get into it, but like, they have like basically the same leaf, just like around in a circle. Um, Those you'll want, like the individual leaves should like be smaller than like a singular leaf for a fern, and like packed into a shape that is, compact and makes sense to the geo you're using. We'll get into this more later, just notes to take. And then also I'm gonna talk about colors every single time I do a demo. Your color palette should be cohesive and make sense to your project, because then everything will look pretty. Okay, cool. So, all right, class, let's open up Photoshop. We're gonna paint now. Okay, cool. Can you still see my screen? I just want to make sure.
Yes, we can
Okay,
perfectly see.
good. I did it correctly. Let's go. Okay.
Let's go.
So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna make a simple leaf. So let's start to do a demo on that. And I'm gonna borrow this color palette that I've made for the project I was working on, just because it's a little bit easier. So first, we're going to need to make the shape of the leaf. Now, personally for me, I like to kind of use the lasso tool when it comes to making a leaf. It just kind of, fair warning, my two warnings. One, they're making pizza downstairs, so if you hear any weird noises and rumblings, it's the pizza blender thing. Second, my hands are very shaky, so I might have to do things over and over again, unfortunately. Hopefully your hands are less shaky than mine.
Perks of a
So when it
live
comes,
demo.
yeah, right? So when it comes to making a leaf, you're gonna wanna grab your shape however you want. If you draw it out with just the brush tool, good on you. I wish I could do that. And then we grab the actual color here. Unfortunately, my settings are a little weird right now, so it doesn't want to grab. Let me actually do this. Why is it doing that? Okay, that's fine. I'll just grab a color myself. Being a little weird today. That's okay though. And then let's clean this up a little bit. Also, I want to preface this by saying I'm not a painter. I actually went into 3D because I am not a good 2D artist. So I was thinking, oh hey, if I go into 3D, I won't have to paint anything ever again. And now look where I am. I paint all the time. So I'm not coming from this of an angle of like an illustrator, who does this literally all the time. I kind of come, or at least I hope my teaching style is coming from a place of you can do this no matter your skill level in painting, because honestly, anybody can do it if they just put their heart into it. So that's a good enough leaf shape, right? So you get your base color. I'm actually going to rotate it a bit and follow my own advice, because making the leaf straight will help you not only in Maya, but also in your painting. So one of the first things I try to do when painting just simple leaves is to, let's see, oh, now it's working, fantastic. Is to start with a gradient. So easy way to lock things down in Photoshop if you didn't know, and you have something on a layer like this, is you click this little checker box thing, and then I can go with a gradient and nothing else will be affected. So I like to put a simple little gradient through the leaf. You should use, when you're doing hand painting stuff, and honestly, stylized art in general, gradients are super important and they can really help fake depth and shadows, highlights, the whole shebang. And then I turn up my smoothing value because again, my hands are very shaky. And then from here, we're gonna make this little like stem little guy. Not all leaves have like a simple stem like this, but more or less kind of too thick. So let's like that. And then if we want, we can clean it up a little bit. Turn it down. Right, 'cause most leaves have a stem. Okay, cool. So from here, it kind of gets a little crazy. And by that, I mean we kind of have to mess around with the settings of your brush to make it maybe a little softer, and then also mess with flow, which flow is kind of weird because it doesn't do the same thing as opacity, but the way I kind of see it is that if you were, say, watercolor painting and, or oil painting what have you, and you pick up like a bunch of paint and then slather it on your canvas, that's maybe flow 100%. Whereas the lower percentage points are going to be maybe half or just like little dabs of color. So you can make multiple strokes, right? And sort of start to, oh, wrong color. Start to work things forward, because what we're going to want to do here is kind of make a shadow, because again, even with the stem here, we're going to be wanting to work in a sort of gradient pattern to fake depth. And then we're also going to give a little bit of love to the sides as well to kind of fake that depth, because unfortunately we're not working with normal maps, unless you are, which then that'll help. And then it also works for like a highlight, because like if this stem is like 100% dark all the way down, that's gonna look weird. So we need to kind of, a lot of it is just like grabbing colors and then painting it in, going back and forth. I feel like Bob Ross right now. It's kind of cool.
It's definitely giving those kind of vibes right now, and
Heck yeah.
I love it.
And then another thing I like to do, and I'll be doing this a lot, is actually going in with Gaussian blur, completely mucking it up. But at least in this case, kind of, I've taken the really harsher values that I've given to this leaf, and now I'm kind of softening them up a little bit. Gaussian blur can save your butt, because sometimes just things aren't making sense. Gaussian blur, and you're fine now. I'm actually gonna put this on another layer. I like to work very, what's the term? Non-destructively. So by kind of moving my process to different layers, that can kind of help. So here, I'm kind of bringing like the highlights back in. I'm gonna end up blurring this as well. It's a little bit too dark. And we'll go to Gaussian blur. Okay, cool. And usually when I'm done with something like simple like that, I merge it down, so that way my layers aren't getting crazy. I think, let's see. Let's grab this color, this darker color, because we need a bit more depth in the shadow category. Yeah, one great thing about Gaussian blur is that you really don't have to worry too much about making your shapes perfect. I struggle with that immensely. If that's how painting worked, I don't think I'd be able to do this foliage thing, because oh my gosh. So luckily, blurring things can go a long way. I won't do everything, but it will significantly help. Actually, I still need to do that. Tone that down a little bit. Okay, cool. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Let's see. So one thing I also really like to do, let me write this down, is mess with these different, gosh, what are these called? Vanity.
Blending
They're
layers.
blending layers, yes.
Yes.
These are great, especially for highlights and lowlights. For this particular leaf, I'm actually kind of vibing with the um, colors I've chosen myself, but oftentimes something will look weird, so I'll just slap a color and then put it on an overlay and then or whatever else, and that'll usually help. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Okay, cool. In this case, we're going to turn flow back up. Um, let's actually turn this down. We're going to work on how to fake a highlight. So I try to make like one really prominent middle line and then kind of like half that value. So that way, once you blend, it'll have a nice like gradient to it. Because otherwise, if it's a harsh line, um, the the difference between your highlight and your leaf is going to look a little weird. And then I put this on dodge. That's kind of cool. Usually, is it color dodge? They got a couple of cool ones. I think you can kind of eyeball it. I'm gonna go with lighter color and see how that helps. Uh, you can kind of blend this out. Then you can kind of step back. Well, a good thing to do is just to kind of step back and look at your leaf and see what's going on. And this one in particular, I think we need some more sharper values. So let's see. Okay, cool. Adding also custom gradients to your stem can help too. So that's what I'm going to do here before I blend this out. Let's see. Oh, actually, grab maybe this color. So like again, it won't be so harsh. Let's see why that wasn't working. So yeah, a lot of this honestly is just kind of going back and forth and messing with a couple settings to get the look that you want. Let's see, I think it's honestly looking pretty good. And then sometimes if you want, you can add a highlight. It really just depends on what the look is you're going for with your leaf. This is a very airbrush version of a leaf, whereas this one I was kind of being a bit more sharp about it. Still feel like these values aren't as sharp as I want them to be. Let's actually go in and just kind of paint around a little bit. Should turn this lower. Flow on 1% can save your butt, honestly, because it just adds things in a really slow variable. And just allows you to kind of paint what you want. Granted, you have to make a million strokes to do that, so maybe put it to 2%. I like to grab like colors that are close to like the value that I want and then kind of muck it up like that. The more that you can do when you're painting rather than constantly relying on Gaussian blur, the better, because then the blur will just be more accurate to what you are after. I don't like this shadowed look to the highlights. Keep that. Now let's blur it. Okay, cool. A bit more defined. I feel like we can go more intense with the highlights. I'm gonna add another one. Trying to make an edit to a highlight. I like to do like a really thin but really hard line. Honestly, that's a nice color, so I'm just gonna keep that in normal blend. Because if you make it too thick or heck the same width as your other highlight, then again you're gonna like miss out on that nice gradation of highlight. So before, after. I think that was nice. Well, that's more or less how you paint a leaf. Again, you can kind of find your own style with it, but just kind of like going back and forth between like, uh, messing with your flow value, Gaussian blur, gradients, and kind of just using a lot of reference too as to how your leaf looks, and you can find the look that you are looking for. So I'm gonna move on. I'm just gonna put this all in a folder. I'm gonna move on to other types of leaves or reeds, maybe you'd call them, or fern leaves. Just they're really, really thin. See what I mean in a second. Um, Basically, these guys. And as you can tell, my hands are shaky, aren't they? That's okay. So these are really fun plants to do. These are going to be like your spiky boys, is what I like to call them. I think there's actually a fern called that looks like this called the spider plant or something. It's kind of whack, but let's use a different color. Let's go with like a darker green. So with this, you're going to be basically, we're doing the same thing, right? It's just a different shape that you have to think about. So let's find a cool dark tone we like. Kind of work that in. I like this yellow. Let's work that in too. And let's get a stem color in there. And then also you can use the, if you hold down shift when you're drawing something, it'll give you straight lines. I wish there were more shortcuts to get good, pretty shapes in Photoshop. They would help my hands a lot. Another technique for getting a really nice sort of blend on your stem and also keeping it sharp is, so if you duplicate, did I actually do that on a, oh good, I did on a separate layer. So you've got 2 layers to this stem here, and if you blur one, you get this nice little middle point. Might be good to actually duplicate it. Let's see if we can put it where it needs to be. Cool. And then, because we're gonna have like, so you can see kind of outliers of the leaf, you go in, you select your leaf, Control Shift I to invert your selection, or delete, as long as you're on the right layer. That one, yeah, cool. Then you get no more quote unquote flyaways. I'm gonna merge all this down, keep it. Actually, before I do that, I'm gonna merge just the stem part here and give it a nice gradient. If you take away anything, just use gradients all the time. They are so important, and they help prevent your art from looking flat. And it's just a nice transition. And then now we'll merge it down. We'll select everything, and we're gonna go in with another darker gradient. Well, I don't recommend it, but I also do it, so it's a little hypocritical. You could technically paint with just a mouse. I used to do that a lot because my tablet situation wasn't great. However, it worked. And sometimes I still do it. Tempted not to even mention this because I know some people will do it. It's like the whole ZBrush don't do that in ZBrush, right? But it works. If a mouse is your tool of choice and it helps with accessibility, then go for it. I'm gonna just check the different layer blends here to see if there's, okay, that I actually might like this. Yeah, hard light looks nice for that. I usually end up using like overlay, hard light, hard mix where it's not chaotic, and then darken or multiply to make really nice tones to your shadows. But again, it's kind of whatever ends up looking nice, right? Okay, cool. And another thing we're gonna go over real quick is, see if my hands can cooperate, is adding like little lines like texture to the leaves. Usually like to do this in a lighter grayer tone. So we'll end up bringing this out a little bit. But these are going to be really, really thin, faint lines that honestly no one would notice. Maybe. But they end up adding to the complexity of the shape. You can go more finer, more precise than that, but this is just more to express the point. So those are like barely there. Like literally I'm teetering on 10%. But when you end up making your plant. It just adds a variance of like texture instead of if you really want to analyze it, just being a bunch of gradients, which gradients are nice and I think they make things look nice, but it's good to have like detail. And you don't have to get really detailed with it. Like something I want to stress, you don't have to be a master painter to pull this off because at the time I don't know what I'm doing when I paint. So, it's kind of cool just to realize that simple shapes and just simple gradations and blurs and things like that will actually give you the result you want. So then I always like to check that. I actually think that blended it. Oh, it did, but I actually like how that looks. See, there was a difference with the whole blend layer thing, but yeah, I like how that looks, so that's fine. So now I pick a lighter color. And we're gonna make that like same highlights sort of thing happen. I'll make a really big one and then a really direct one. Bad. See, that's why you gotta work on separate layers, right? We need that to be in its own layer. Now we can blend it. Color dodge. We'll try color dodge. I actually might go into adjustments. I do this a lot when my colors are just like not what I want them to be. That's kind of nice. So let's try that. I don't really know. The opacity needs to be down a lot for that. Alright, so that gives it kind of a nice highlight. Let's do it one more time. Because the difference from here to here, great. Difference from here to here, a little lacking. And you want a clear difference. Not a hard line, but just a peak of your highlights and lowlights. Cool. So that's pretty much how you make a fern leaf. And so what was I gonna do next? Oh, roses and radial flowers. Let's talk about radial flowers for a second. Or petals. Get a nice little petal shape. Let's make something nice and pink. Why not? I'm sure this was on its own layer. Can kind of conform it to make it straight. It's just easier to paint. This one's gonna have no stem because it's a flower. The stem is the green parts that are underneath. So I'm gonna start by painting in a little shadow, accompanied by something darker. We'll blur it out. Really simple stuff. Flowers can honestly be one of the easiest things to make. It depends on the flower. Simple, like, God, what would you call those? Just like really simple, like 5-point flowers shaped like this. They're not that bad. Roses can be a bitch, but I'll get to that in a bit. Nice highlight like that. I'm actually paint this in myself. It's all about highlights and lowlights and just knowing where to place them. That's why reference is important, so you understand not only how to shape the flower, but how to draw it. Obviously, if you were a brush savant, you could probably get way more fancier with this type of stuff and probably make it easier on yourself. But that's a simple petal. Might actually. Let's see. I can blur it just a smidge. Probably wouldn't matter that much, but it does to me. I'm gonna merge it all down. We got this nice little petal here, and we're gonna make how you would set up a radial flower. So you're gonna copy paste this one. I'm gonna do a 5.1 because that's the example I actually have in the document. And another one. It's good to think modularly with everything, plants included, because instead of painting 5 petals, I copied and pasted one. Because is the player really gonna notice that they're all technically the same petal? No. Well, we'd notice, yeah, but it's, you know, it saves time, energy, get to make more plants. If you really wanted to be really technical with it, let me put these where they need to be. You could go ahead and make maybe a drop shadow. So like how I would work that. So you take lower color, select it, new layer, turn out the flow because that's not enough. So then you can give some definition as to what petals on top and what's below. But honestly, in my experience, these flowers are so small as it is, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. But I still think it looks nice, so it's kind of whatever you want to do. And then you got your quote unquote radial flower. You can probably go in and edit the shape more than this, but the reason that it's more efficient to do this, because what you could technically do is you know, make one petal and then rearrange it like this in Maya, right? Um, however, one that's a bit harder to do. Here you're kind of doing it for yourself anyway, and depending on the subdivisions that you give to one petal, doing just a subdivided top of a cylinder is less polys than you would be doing in your little petal amalgamation. Um, so this it takes away from some things, but it saves your butt most of the time. So I just recommend, if you can, doing it like this. And then all all flowers have like a little thing in the center. Now for this one, you can just put it on the flower if you want. And then so we start. For these, I like to start with the darkest tone. So maybe I might do more like color like that. And then work my way up to the lighter color. Filter, Gaussian blur. And then there you go, more or less. You could probably edit the actual colors, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to make it perfect. But that's how you'd more or less set that up. Now you could actually take this, put it off to the side. Oh, geez. You could set it off to the side like this. Imagine that was gradient as I had it before. And you could actually take a sphere, cut it in half, and then use that as the texture for the sphere, which you then place in the middle of the flower. You then have to do a bunch of other shit to basically make it so that there's no holes and that the stem matches up, things like that. But if you really wanted more depth to your flower, that's one way you could do that. You could probably end up subdividing the top of this sphere and then matching it up in UVs to make it like that. But that's just, there's multiple ways to do the same thing. And then I only have so much time left. I want to go over trees because that's really important. And honestly, I call it the final boss, not just because, but because it is actually fairly difficult until you start to realize, oh wait, there's a way to set these up. So it's basically like the same thing we did for the leaf, right? So I'm going to basically copy the process I did over here. Just make a bunch. There's going to be a couple layers to this. So with this first one, I'm not that specific. I'm more just trying to shape the process of my bush or leaf pile, yada yada. Okay. Alright, cool. Then we're gonna go in real quick and make stems. Tree ones don't actually have to be that painterly, I've noticed, because depending on the settings of your shader, a lot of it gets wiped away. Like for example, I've been experimenting with subsurface on my leaves, and it makes them look gorgeous and makes trees like look fantastic. However, it does take the detail out of your painted leaves. It's a little sad, but it's okay. But I've also seen people when it comes to making leaves, they just do they stop at the after before the stem and it's just black color. So like you can get away with that as well. So more or less, while we're learning painting here, we're also learning how to set these things up. So that's half the battle rather than just the artistic part of it. Then gonna go to like half opacity. Just keep flow like that. And we're going to make half the leaf drop shadow. Not drop shadow. Whatever type of shadow you'd call this. Could have done this with the other leaf from earlier, but I'm just trying to show a variety of how to shade your plants, because there's not one right way to do everything. Kind of a repetitive process, unfortunately, but I'm trying to move quickly because I want to get to questions. Cool. Then once you're done that, same color, full opacity, bring the flow down, and we end up, bring it up a little bit more than that. And we end up making this gradient. All roads lead back to the gradient. Getting away that like harshness that's at the beginning. Should turn this a little down. Cool. And then I'm gonna make another layer over top. Same color. Fill it all in. Maybe a soft light. We're trying to make it darker. Soft light will do. Come back to that in a second. And yes, start the process over again. This time being a bit more specific. of using the last leaf as a sort of guide for placement. At this point, I like to turn off the ones underneath so I can kind of just focus on these guys. So hopefully this demo shows you that painting foliage is not rocket science, because it's not that bad. And there's a reason it's my favorite. And you can get into some crazy stuff too. Good. It's done. I will say, if using a tablet is easier to do this, can't imagine doing this with, well, I can't imagine doing this with my mouse because I've done it before. But yeah, definitely easier with a tablet. But you do you. Then at the end, you end up having something like this, which you can then go and brighten up a little bit. So then you have a clear difference between uh, shadow leaves and highlight leaves. And then that's where you'd have your little fun little bush guy. So that's kind of the end of the painting demo. Some things I wanted to talk about that are just really useful, and then we'll get into questions. Sorry, this went a little bit. We're gonna go a little over time with this, but
You're totally fine.
I don't want to leave you guys with just here's a leaf. Because I feel like, yeah, there's a lot of questions I had going into the process that took forever to figure out. So hopefully you can skip that process. So if you use Maya, to kind of like organize and like make, start to mess around, make your foliage cards. A really easy way to end up seeing your foliage in the crystal clearly. So go to viewport, click this little box thing, and then end up changing your transparency algorithm to alpha cut. This PowerPoint, by the way, is going to be linked somewhere in this Discord server, so you don't have to memorize all this.
Perfect.
But yeah, so that ends up giving you this, which took me forever to figure out, which it shouldn't have, but so there you go. And then I have some sort of style guides on how to shape your leaves. I won't get into too detail with them here. I have some notes, but basically 6 faces for leaves, more or less. You can get more detailed with it if you have the budget. This is how I like to shape those spider fern things. See how you can see here the little lines that were made for like the detail stuff? That's what that does. So there's a visualization of what that looks like, at least just in base color. Here's how I like to shape radial flowers. Here's the mess I was talking about with having to figure out if you make this a sphere or whatever, so you have to deal with that. Good luck. Complex layered flowers are actually not as complex as one might think. It's basically you start with flat, right? And then it like slowly starts to curve inward. You'll see this if you actually look like a peony or a rose. It slowly it like bunches up the further you go in. It's like a slice of pie right here of how you kind of would make that work. And then you have a peony. As far as trees are concerned, the more complicated thing of the bunch. It's good to make a bunch of different types of trees or tree parts, tree organs, yay. Depending on the shapes that you might want to have, because if you just have this guy, it's gonna be obvious. And this is kind of a little jumbled, so oh, that's not what I wanted to click. To better visualize how you'd shape your planes, kind of do it like this, right? Got your like, oh jeez. You got your plane here. You're gonna like subdivide it like this, right? You're gonna want to like take it after like a circle, make it like this nice. If you're looking at the side, a really nice like curved shape, and then over time, as you make your, imagine these are all these lines are like individual cards that you've made. Sort of like stack them into, or like almost around like a circle. And you do that a bunch of times, and eventually you'll end up with the hell that is this amalgamation. So yeah, that's basically it. Lightning round things. Feel free to mix and match, things from PBR or hand painted stylized techniques. There's a lot of overlap. Yeah, you can use this in any drawing program. Then usually less is more. Like I didn't get into any complex painting techniques, at least I hope I didn't today. Usually broad shapes, broad shadows, and highlights really give your message across, because remember, usually these plants are super, super small, so you have to kind of dramatize your bigger values. So less is more until it isn't. There's also the other side of that where your foliage can be very flat or clay-like if you don't add that detail, those gradients. So, while I may stress like this isn't rocket science, there's also a strategy to how to paint these things, which you'll find as you explore foliage, practice, because that's the only way you're going to become used to it. Test things out, try new things, because that's fun. And then study. Speaking of studying, I have a bunch of links in this presentation, including people I have religiously studied their foliage styles, as well as a bunch of other, a lot of wow stuff. Bunch of other artists that just know their shit when it comes to foliage. So